Big Questions with the Dead Milkmen. Each week while working on the new album, the Dead Milkmen ask each other a question.
Okay, hey everybody, this week's big question is mine, and it is, let's talk about favorite or worst solo albums from band members that have left a successful band they were in. Have they become more, did they become more successful artists on their own, or was leaving the band a big mistake? Okay, so there's a lot of examples of this out there. Here's a couple. I want to start out by mentioning, and that doesn't really qualify to the question, but of course everybody might think of the Kiss solo albums, but they did not leave. They weren't leaving the band. It was just a kind of a marketing ploy, and it was also an attempt, from what I've read, to try and keep the band together, because there was a lot of tension in the band at the time. And of course it didn't really work. Those albums were big flops for all the individual members. But anyway, the two that I want to mention are, one is there was a band called Heatmiser, which formed kind of in the late 80s and went to about the mid 90s. And one of the people in that band was Elliott Smith. And actually, the Dead Milkmen played a show with Heatmiser at the Campervan Metro in Chicago. Oh, yeah. I think it probably was in the early 90s. I can't remember exactly which time period. Joe, the historian of the band, might remember. Joe?
I don't remember the year. I remember I bought their single.
Yeah.
I don't remember.
They were pretty good. I enjoyed
Maybe
them. But anyway, we played in
what
Chicago with Heatmiser. But Elliott Smith was in that band, and he left the band. Well, the band broke up, and he went on to be a much more successful artist, albeit a sort of cult favorite in the indie rock scene area. But his claim to fame was, he wrote the song called Miss Misery, which was used in the movie Good Will Hunting. And the song got nominated for an Oscar, and he was pressured into performing live on the Oscars. He didn't want to do it at first, but he eventually relented. And it was just him on stage with an acoustic guitar and the Oscars orchestra behind him or whatever. It was a very surreal experience. Of course, he didn't win, but one could argue that he went on to a much more successful career than Heatmiser did. Sadly, he met a very untimely end at age 34. He died from what some believe is self-inflicted stab wounds, or it could have been homicide. The actual case apparently remains open, so we're not sure what happened to Elliott. But anyway, that's my example of, I think, someone who went on from a band to gain more success after the band broke up, or he left the band. The second one, I'm going to bring back our old friend and nemesis, David Byrne, because yeah, right. I would personally argue that he'd be better off staying with the Talking Heads. I really haven't liked much of his solo stuff and his sort of arty experimental stuff over the years. He's had a few hits and misses, I think, is what it's been. But nowhere, I don't think anywhere near the success of the Talking Heads. And his recent stage production, I think the most recent one was called American Utopia. And it's him kind of singing and leading a group of people sort of doing choreographed dances on stage, wearing matching suits. And it was an album. I think it was a solo album called American Utopia. I think it was critically acclaimed, and I know people that I know went to see the stage show and liked it, but I don't want to have anything to do with it. One of the reasons is that we'll show a picture of it, but I have a hatred of people performing on stage in bare feet.
Ew.
It was just, I don't know. I don't know what that is, but I just find it gross.
I so have your back on that. First of all, I'm never barefoot.
I've got to be honest, I've considered it many times with us, but I've only ever really considered stocking feet. Like I would wear socks. Bare feet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys mind, by the way, if I wore socks during the show?
Socks, I don't mind.
No,
Bare
socks
feet
are
might be-
okay, but bare feet, I watch, YouTube videos of people demonstrating guitar pedals and stuff. And when they demonstrate them with bare feet, I was like, ew, that's gross.
I hate feet. Yeah.
Didn't
Ugh.
didn't Grant Hart play barefoot?
Yes, he played drums barefoot, and I didn't care for that.
Are
Personally.
you in Fish? You know what I mean? Like, are you going to play hacky sack?
I've got to be in
During the middle of
contact
that?
with Mother Earth while I play. Right?
Yeah. Oh, man, I've got to. And you're on a stage. You're not on Mother Earth.
I
And
was
my,
ask if it was okay if I wore Birkenstocks with the socks, but never mind. I'm not going to do that.
No.
White socks and Birkenstocks.
Yeah. The only side project of the Talking Heads that I really liked was Chris and Tina's Tom Tom Club. Wordy Rappinghood is a classic. So anyway, those are my two solo albums, artists from bands that were successful that I wanted to mention tonight.
And I will go with a gentleman who we mentioned once on the show briefly, who's Brant Showers is his name. Brant Showers is, we mentioned him in the producer episode, but I just mentioned he'd done a brilliant job producing the last Special Mouths album. You guys may have met him. I don't know if you met him in San Diego, but he was one of our San Diego shows. Brant was one half of the band AIMON, which is a band I love. The other half was his partner, Nancy Showers. So I don't know if he's actually left AIMON, and I'm pretty sure Nancy could find him easily. They live in the same house, but he's just gone off and done a solo thing. Now, by the way, for those of you, AIMON, I got on board with them exactly about 10 years ago. 10 years ago in 2012, they put out an album called FLATLINER, which was freaking brilliant. And it was one of those musical game changers. So it's something you should definitely seek out. Excuse me. I got that beer cough I sometimes get, which I use by washing down with more beer. Anyway, Brand has a band now, or a project now called SØLVE, or it might be SØLVE, because the name seems to come from, the statue of Baphomet, where on the one arm it says SØLVE, and on the other arm it says coagula, and that's Latin for solve et coagula, which is to dissolve and bring together. You certainly do learn a lot on this show, don't you? Well, or it might say solve et Coachella. I don't know. I'm getting old. Eyes are going. So that's where the name comes from. So it might be SØLVE, it might be SØLVE. Actually, tonight, right after this show, which you folks won't get to see because we're recording this in advance, but Caustic is hosting a listening party on Twitch for the new SØLVE album. And I've heard it all the way through, but I'm going to do the listening party because it is freaking fantastic. The new album is called Earth Inferno, and it is one of the best albums I've heard this year. It is freaking fantastic. So to go from something that was really, really good and I really loved, and to say, okay, well, I'm going to go off and do my own thing, and to do something I find amazing, I give him much respect. We'll link to it, because whatever I say about it is going to pale in comparison to the review that I Die You Die wrote. So go read the I Die You Die review. It sums the whole thing up very nicely. I'm going to recommend that you check out Earth Inferno. You want to check out the albums Never Plus Enough, and parenthetically it says Inferno, and also Black Silk Stone. Those will hook you. Those are really, really good tunes. And I recommend, like I said, I recommend Caustic. If Caustic's involved, it's going to be good. Caustic is doing the listening party tonight. So that's where I'm headed right after this. Now, I understand some of you might be frightened. You might be too scared to listen to this album. And I get that, because what happened to the people who were into like Journey and Air Supply, and somebody played them some Ramones, and then they peed their pants and they ran off into the woods. And it might happen to you. In fact, if you're a big fan of like the 1975, you probably will pee your pants and run off into the woods when you hear it, but it's worth it for the learning experience. So I would just definitely say, take the chance. Please give Earth Inferno a listen, and then start going backwards if you've never listened to anything from AIMON, and please give a listen to AIMON's FLATLINER, and also the AIMON self-titled album. It's really, really good stuff. So Brant Showers, I give him much props for doing something brilliant, and then splitting apart to do his own thing, and it also being brilliant, and also being a brilliant producer. It's nice to see somebody, be able to do stuff on their own. Now, let's talk about my least favorite solo project. And to do that, I'm going to have to resort to, oh shit. Anyway, sometimes it works, sometimes it don't. I'm going to have to resort, I'm going to talk to you folks about Mick Jagger's She's the Boss. Now, some of you probably weren't even aware of this album. It came out in 1985. Maybe you weren't born yet, or maybe like the rest of us, you spent 1985 listening to The Firstborn is Dead by Nick Cave. She's the Boss is just bad. And also, you can't say She's the Boss without having to do a Tony Danza impersonation. Mona, Angela. So, by the way, Who's the Boss came out in 1984, a year before She's the Boss, which meant there was nobody at Mick Jagger's camp to go, you know, people are going to do Tony Danza impersonations.
Did they answer the question in the last episode where they're like, all right, here's the boss?
Who's the boss? Satan. Satan was, it was the big statue of Baphomet came out, and Tony went, Salve et coagula Mona. Yes, satanic Tony Danza. You saw it here first, people. Actually, Keith Richards, Dean had loaned me the Keith Richards autobiography, and in his autobiography, Keith Richards compared the She's the Boss album to Mein Kampf. He also said, he goes, I never listened to the whole thing. And I'm the only one who did. And that's true. The album is a platinum seller, but nobody ever sort of talks about it, which brings us back to Tony Danza. There's an episode of The Love Boat. And this episode of The Love Boat is one of the pillars on which our show rests. The episode of The Love Boat is one where Tony Danza plays the son of actor James Shigeta. James Shigeta, you might remember from Die Hard. He's the executive. He gets shot. He's a nice guy. But he plays the son. So Tony Danza is playing a Japanese American. And in this episode of The Love Boat, Tony Danza turns to the great James Shigeta and goes, but Dad, I'm proud to be Japanese. And the reason I bring this up is because as much of a tragedy, of a nightmare as that episode is, and it is a flaming pile of feces, it's people still remember it. I saw it drunk with my buddies in college, and I still talk about it today. But nobody remembers She's the Boss. It's a platinum seller. They spent a lot of money on it. I'm sure they were telling Mick it's going to be the biggest album ever. And Mick probably thought, oh yeah, forget all that other stuff. Forget Exile on Main Street. Forget Some Girls. Forget the stuff we did in the past. This is my big shot to show them I can do it alone. And they pumped a lot of money into it. It sold records, but nobody remembers it as being good, except maybe Tony Danza.
I don't even remember that album. She's the Boss. But there you go. I guess he went back into the Rolling Stones though after that, because they did a bunch of albums.
Was that the rule? You had to leave the band forever? Because nobody ever leaves the band forever. I quit this band like twice a week for 40 years.
There aren't any rules. My first thought was Keith Morris leaving Black Flag to form Circle Jerks, and he had a great career with Circle Jerks, but then I realized that's not a solo album. I don't think he did a solo album. So my second thought was Van Halen, and David Lee Roth left Van Halen and had a great solo career and released a bunch of good albums. One of the, I guess he also had an EP that I technically came out before he left, but not that long before he parted ways with Van Halen. Eat 'Em and Smile, I think, was a huge album, and so he had great success. And Van Halen kept going. You could argue they were also successful with Sammy Hagar, but probably not as successful as they were with David Lee Roth, who, by the way, I read gave Van Halen their name.
What? There were two brothers named Van Halen. Wait a minute. Time out. I hate to interrupt you. I really do. But I'm looking at the other guys and they're saying, Rodney, stop him. Stop him. We travel back in time and go, you shall call the babies Van Halen.
The band existed for a few years in the 70s under the name Mammoth. And David Lee Roth joined them as their singer and said, you really should change your name to Van Halen.
Well, thank goodness it wasn't Lee Roth.
'Cause-
No, that's-
Anthony.
Change it
It's
to
Michael Anthony. Change the band name to Anthony.
Anthony.
They would
Anthony would
never
have
have. They always play South
whatever.
Philly. Hey, let's go see Anthony.
Is it Little Anthony? No,
Little
no.
Anthony. Yeah.
For the not so successful departure, I'm gonna mention Jonathan Segel of the band, or is it Segel of the band Campervan Beethoven. He left the band when they were rehearsing for their album Key Lime Pie. Parted ways. He was having, I think, disagreements, artistic differences, and he released a double solo album, which was much anticipated by me anyway, called Storytelling. And all I can remember is I was very disappointed with it. I don't think it sold very well. I couldn't find any information in a quick search on the internet. I think you can hear it on streaming services though, so you can prove me wrong and say it's a great album, but I thought it was a little on the dull and
But he's playing with Campervan again. I mean, they've done some tours.
well, I guess yeah, they broke up after the Key Lime Pie album. They got someone to. He was a mandolin player and violin player in the band. He also plays guitar. And not that Jonathan didn't have a. I don't know anything about his solo career. I know he's released other albums. I didn't hear them, but he played guitar, I think, for the band Sparkle Horse later on. So yeah, that's my not so successful departure.
That's 2 weeks in a row you mentioned Campervan Beethoven. You need to buy some new albums. May I recommend SØLVE's Earth Inferno?
All right.
I think you won't be disappointed in that.
I chose Morrissey. In general, all of his albums suck. I can't think of one good song on any of his solo albums, and I love or loved the Smiths. I don't not like them now. Now, for some reason, now his voice bothers me. It didn't a long time ago. I think like I just loved the guitar and bass in the Smiths so much that I just kind of was like, okay, Morrissey's doing his thing. But I was curious and got one of his solo albums, and I sold it like the next day. I was like, this is crap. I don't know. But I don't think I don't know, maybe he was considered more successful because he was on MTV at that point. The Smiths, I don't know if they ever were, unless it was like 120 minutes or something. But then for the successful one, I chose Danny Elfman, because as much as I love Oingo Boingo, his film scores are amazing, and he's definitely pretty successful doing that. And then another one I chose as like a quirky one was Syd Barrett. His solo stuff is way better than what Pink Floyd was producing at the same time without him, I'd say. I feel like I mentioned Pink Floyd a lot and how much I don't like them, and Kiss. And but yeah, it's funny. I was thinking about how many times I've read like some kind of biography of a band in like the 60s or 70s, and the manager is like, hey, you got to put out a solo album. It seems like it's like this thing that like starts to disentangle the band. Like the band starts to like, and I never knew about Mick Jagger doing that either. But I was thinking about like how the Kinks, like they had Dave Davies do a solo album, and the band was like, what is this? Like, why are you doing like a solo album? And I guess Brian Wilson ended up doing that Smile album without the band. I don't know. It just seems like it's kind of like did anything, I was wondering if anything ever came out of that was good. Like one of the band members does a solo album and stays with the band, but like, I don't know.
Well, I don't know. I mean, Rodney went to see a Joe Perry project. He did a solo album from Aerosmith. I don't know. They were pretty bad.
Yeah, I didn't go to see him. I went to Great Adventure, and he happened to be playing there.
Oh, okay.
And I was 17. Yeah, yeah.
I wanted to say one more thing, which will turn into many more things, I'm sure. Morrissey is just a shitty person, it sounds like, too.
Yes.
He sounds racist and closed-minded, and maybe latently homophobic. even though a lot of his music, his Smith stuff, doesn't seem like that.
Here's the thing about Morrissey, and here's a guy who said great stuff about the National Front. And trust me, people, the National Front are not the Rainbow Coalition. They're not. But Latinos love him. They love his music, and I can't figure this out because that's like watching Jews line up to see a Mel Gibson film. You know, like, oh, I know he hates us, but you know, the plot is really good in this. To me, that right there is always, and I understand there's a thing, you know, and a lot of Latino communities ask for very emotional singers, and that's why they like him. And I know, you know, but really, you know, I would just get the message and realize that, you know, he's trying, he just doesn't connect with you folks.
If you ever hear the band The Monochrome Set, you'll
yes,
notice that Morrissey completely tried to rip off the lead singer and didn't do a very good job, I think. So
how about Steve Perry? You mentioned Journey earlier. Steve Perry had a couple of solo albums.
Did he?
Yeah, I didn't remember, but my wife did. I told her the question for tonight, and she says, "Oh, the worst one is probably Steve Perry from Journey."
Anything involved with Journey, there are no good. If you watch this show, a lot of people, you're never going to say, "Boy, you know, I really like that one Journey too."
I'll tell you what, though, if you ever next time you're stoned, go look at the Separate Ways video from Journey. It's ridiculous. You will have a stomach ache. It's so funny, and it's not trying to be funny. It's awful.
Oh, man. Roseanne. Wait,
well, thank you, gentlemen, for all your wonderful entries for this week. Let's move on to recommendations.
Move on.
I would like to recommend a Netflix movie that just came out recently. It's called Operation Mincemeat, and it is a dramatization of a real-life event that took place during the Second World War, 1943, I believe. And it is a crazy deception plan that the British came up with to try and convince Hitler that the Allies were not going to invade Sicily, that they were going to invade Greece and Sardinia, when in fact they really were going to invade Sicily. And so they concocted this crazy, insane plan where they were going to dump a dead guy in the water off of Spain and have it be found, and then German sympathizers in Spain. Spain was neutral in the war, by the way.
Yeah, they had a civil war going on.
Convey the information all the way up to Hitler, and amazingly, they convinced him of this. And so the Allies landed on Sicily and met with a lot less resistance than they were worried about. Anyway, the movie is called Operation Mincemeat. It's a good dramatization. There is actually a documentary which you can see on YouTube, also called Operation Mincemeat, put together by the BBC, that came out about 10 years ago. So I would recommend you check it out. We'll provide links to those, the trailer and the video, the documentary, and also the Wikipedia entry. You can read about it's just a crazy story. Anyway, that's my recommendation.
Yeah, you know, Operation Mincemeat on the posters, you know, the tagline was Saving Private Ryan meets Weekend at Bernie's.
Right.
Yeah. Turns out it's surprisingly easy to fool Nazis, as we all just recently saw up in Idaho. 31 sweaty men crammed into the back of a truck together on their way to interrupt a pride parade as their bodies jostle together, writhing over each bump. Where am I? Oh yeah, I gotta tell you people about a film, probably one of my new favorite films. And this film is an Ozploitation film. I love me my Ozploitation. Ozploitation, usually films from the late 70s into the early 80s, up into the very early 90s, or late 80s up to the early 90s, made in Australia, that are usually things like Houseboat of Horror, or there's some giant pig running through the outback killing everybody. These films are amazing, and I love them all. But there's one I wanted to see for a while, and I saw a blip of it in a documentary called Not Quite Hollywood, and it kind of registered, and somebody recently told me about it, so I went and saw it. The film is called Sons of Steel, and it is absolutely amazing. It takes place in a dystopian future in Australia, where there's a singer named Black Alice from a band. He's a big burly guy, looks kind of Danzig-esque, but with Danny DeVito's haircut. I'm giving too much away. But the thing is, I love any, like, the film was made in 1988. or maybe 1987, maybe 1989. Nobody knows for sure. It's completely bonkers. I love the look of it. I love that Australian post-apocalyptic look. Maybe why I'm such a big Angel Spit fan. It looks, if you put an Angel Spit album on while you watch this, it kind of syncs up. The film is so much fun and so bizarre, and I can't recommend it enough. You can watch it for free on the Internet Archive, and we'll give you a link. And the reason I'm mentioning it is because there's a podcast called VHUS. It's the VHUS podcast. I'm going to be a guest on it. And my thing was to watch this film, and the host and I spoke back and forth about it, and we're cracking up and having a really great time. And I thank those so much for turning me on to this movie. I love exploitation, and I love finding a weird old film I've never seen before. So yes, you will very, very much enjoy Sons of Steel. Maybe not for the reasons you think, but you'll like it. And you'll like the VH US podcast. They've had Sean Baby on and Sarah Marshall, who does the You're Wrong About podcast. So two people I'm a big fan of.
I'm always forgetting Sarah Marshall.
I recommend being yourself.
Oh.
There's nobody else better to be, unless you're an actor, in which case you should be the character you're portraying, I guess.
I'm portraying Blind Pew from Treasure Island.
Well, I was gonna recommend being somebody else, but
Be yourself and somebody else.
instead I'll recommend this super USB cassette capture.
What is it?
It is I found it for $5 at a thrift store, and it is like it makes MP3s from tapes, you know. It's not a big deal, but I did realize that I had like 4 or 5 different pieces of equipment that would do this, and I thought, oh, that's $5 used, and it didn't have the USB cable, and it's one of those awkward, like the thicker ones. But I have every like USB cable I've ever come in contact with still, so I found one. But what's really cool is I found all these mixtapes from 20, 25 years ago. And some of them, I don't even know where these songs came from. So I want to like digitize these things.
Have you tried it out?
I also recommend earplugs, whatever kind you like, because you guys need to wear earplugs. Yeah, exactly. And also, I'm recommended Barry before. If you're watching it, keep watching it, because the last episode, I guess, of the season at least was last night, and it was pretty awesome. It was a good way to wrap up the show. That's it.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
I missed something. You kind of jumped forward in frame like the movie Sinister. I was like, it's Mr. Magoo.
You guys remember that
Weird.
fake Max Headroom that interrupted the TV broadcast years ago?
Love Matt. Yeah. Well, we interrupted Doctor Who. Yeah. There's actually a film that hits a triple that's kind of based on that, on a guy who would interrupt these broadcasts, and this guy goes looking for who's doing it. And I can't remember the name of it now, but I'm not going to recommend it because it hits a triple. But maybe in this week's addendum, I might recommend The Northman, which is the best film I've seen all year.
Let Melissa know I found the mixtape she sent me in like 1995 or something.
From Melissa.
There it is.
Great stuff on it.
Wow.
He found it under Jimmy Hoffa.
Bye.
And good. Yep. Bye, guys.